You cannot know your strength without struggle. You cannot know courage without fear. You cannot know your power without pain. That's the reason why most people are living lives of quiet desperation, as Henry David Thoreau said, right? If you look for the hard, the worthy struggle, the challenge, your life will become better. Your life will become easier. So it's not just about getting results. It's about experiencing the transcendence of going to war with yourself and winning. That's the reason why human beings, when you ask them who you admire, we always look at somebody who's gone, regardless of the name, they've gone through adversity, they've transcended it, right? That's the human spirit is rising above that.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Vinny Brusco Show podcast. Hope you are doing well. I have a question for you. What is your relationship with fear? And would you be able to alchemize that fear and turn it into fuel? That brings me to this week's guest, Akshay Nanavati. He is an author, a speaker, a former Marine, an adventure seeker, and he has created what is known as Fearvana, which is taking your fears, alchemizing them, and turning them into fuel to better enhance your life. Akshay and I got into a whole deep conversation, as always, so I hope you enjoy it. Episode number 466 with Akshay Nanavati. Enjoy.
Hi, this is Akshay Nanavati, Marine Corps veteran, adventurer, and author of Fearvana, and this is the Vinny Brusco Show.
And here we go.
I don't know when I started following you or where it was that I came across your Instagram page. But when I did, I instantly thought, and I'm sure you get this a lot, this dude is on some next level shit right now. Like, is this real? Because anytime you come across someone that's doing the things that you're doing, right? There's always this moment of check-in with yourself of what you're actually capable of doing as a human being, right? Because our barometer, like, oh, I can, all right. And you think you could do certain things. And then all of a sudden you step into that field and you're like, oh, this is much harder than I anticipated. But the things you're doing are really unbelievable. And that's not because you're here. I mean, they are 167 miles across Liberia, 24-hour run, 10 days in darkness, skiing 350 miles in minus 40-degree weather. These aren't just, hey, I'm going to go sign up for this trail run, or I'm going to take, this course on something. This is some next level shit. What was the catalyst in your life that kind of turned things over for you?
Joining the Marines is where this birthed this ethos and this mentality of seeking out suffering as a vehicle for transcendence and enlightenment. Even, back then I certainly wasn't doing it with the level of spirituality and awareness I am now, but that's where it was all birthed. Because before that, I was born in India to great parents. I mean, they weren't like extremely wealthy, but we certainly weren't poor. Moved around India, Singapore, Austin, and had a good life. Got very, very heavily into drugs and alcohol when I moved to Austin. Soon after moving here, I was about 16 years old. I mean, I still have these scars on my arm from cutting myself and burning myself and things like that. And watching the movie Black Hawk Down was the trigger. You seen that movie?
I have.
Yeah, that movie was the trigger that changed my life, got me off drugs, and almost overnight joining the Marines. And that's where I started to learn the value of going to war with yourself. And ultimately, not just going to war with yourself, but living for the good of something bigger than you. In the Marines, nobody gives a shit about your well-being. What matters is the good of the group and the men and the mission, right? Like, and that means more than your own personal well-being. And while challenging, while there's times because you fucking hate it, because you just want to like sleep or something, and you still got to go out on a mission, but it's a profoundly beautiful thing to live in that world, to live where the something bigger matters more than your own individual well-being. And that taught me, that laid the foundation for everything I am today.
What was your role in the Marines?
I was an infantry Marine, so I went in the infantry, and when I was deployed to Iraq, I was an infantry non-commissioned officer. I had multiple roles out in the front lines in Iraq. One of my jobs was to walk in front of our vehicle convoys whenever we got to danger zones and to look for bombs before they could be used to kill me and my fellow Marines. Good job.
But is that something that you signed up for? Is it something that they're like, hey, you're going out there and doing that? Was it something that
I didn't choose it. I happened to be in the role that got placed there, but I had no issues with it. one, at this point, by the time I got deployed to Iraq, I had confronted a lot of my fears. I was scared of everything as a kid, scared of tight spaces, scared of open water, scared of heights. So after joining the Marines, I confronted every one of those fears. I was scared of heights, so I went rock climbing. I went skydiving. I went mountain climbing. I was scared of tight spaces, so I went caving. I've been cave diving. I've been scuba diving, ice diving. I mean, you name it, like every outdoor sport, nature became my playground to systematically confront and rise above my fears. So by the time I was deployed to Iraq, I was not only well trained in the art of being with and rising above fear, I was also in a place where, see, I had lost a friend in my unit before I got sent off to war. When we joined the unit, we got super tight. We kept volunteering to go to war together, me and him, me and Neil. And every chance we got, we would, like twice we got an opportunity, we told we're going, and it got canceled last minute. And one summer while I was vacationing in India, he ended up finding a unit to go with, and he was killed.
Wow.
And I always felt guilty that I didn't go with him, that summer I should have, because we weren't getting our chance to go. So I was like, all right, I'll go to India, then come back. But that was the one summer he ended up going, and I wasn't there. And so when I went to war, naively, because you can't control what happens in war, you can't control where bullets fly, bombs explode. But in my mind, it was like, if somebody had to die, I'd rather it be me than anybody else. And again, it was naive. I was a 19-year-old kid at the time, but that was where I was coming from. So I was happy to take that job, and didn't honestly care if I were to. It wasn't a healthy place to be by any means. When you don't care about dying, like today, I'm terrified of dying, but back then I wasn't.
You're terrified of dying now.
I'm terrified of dying.
Really?
People find that weird because of the things I do, but my fear of death doesn't. It only amplifies the experience of life. I mean, I don't go do these things seeking. People think like now I'm about to go for 110 days completely alone across Antarctica. I do all these things. I was on Denali last. I do dangerous things, right? I've lost 2 fingers to frostbite. I do these things, and people think that I'm not scared of death, but I'm terrified of dying, and I value my life so much. These things I do are not to chase death; they're to chase life, and the amplification of life. I mean, it's dialed to a volume that you can't imagine unless you play on the edges. And so the fear of death is what keeps me living life in a greater intensity. It also is what keeps me prepared for what I'm about to go endure. It's what has me training harder, pushing harder, fighting harder, so I can come back alive, because I don't want to. I certainly don't want to die, and I'm scared of it.
That's interesting, because I mean, I don't think anybody wants to die, right? I think, you ask 10 people, I would say 9.5 say they don't want to die, right?
Yeah,
Right.
I get what you mean. Yeah.
But it's almost as if that you're going to you're almost staring at death in the face, right? As much as you think like, yes, it's accelerating my life because now I'm immersed in this experience that's so out of body in some degree. You're also still confronting this very dangerous, or these very dangerous endeavors in which you're essentially staring death in the face.
Confronting your own mortality and being present to it is the greatest way to amplify the intensity in this experience of life. I mean, like you said, most people, generally speaking, don't want to exactly remember death, memento mori.
Remember, you will die.
Remember, you will die. I mean, and I don't like, the closer you are to that, I like think about it, hold on to it. Many Buddhist sects do death meditations where they visualize themselves dying. I mean, I've come close to it. I've almost been killed myself on multiple occasions. I've lost tons of people close to me across the years. I face my own mortality now, and that makes it, because if you really stay present to your death, and I don't just mean like, oh, I could die one day, like hold on to that from every fiber of your being. And I'm not perfect at doing it every day by any means, but the closer you are to it, it changes the way how you live your life. Knowing that that's coming, knowing that one day you will be gone, it will change how you. So many of us live our life never wanting to think about death, never wanting to face it. But when you engage it, when you be with it, and you stay with it, it will alter the experience of life in the most beautiful way.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to know that you're going to die one day, which we all do, right? We all know that. But it's another thing to sit on that and think about that and
Exactly.
really, really own that, like own it to a degree. Like, own the fact that you are
Exactly.
going to die, and
Yeah.
there's no escaping that. The only uh uh release you get from that is really just living in the present moment, because it can be tomorrow, right? It's the old yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, today's a gift, that old
Mm-hmm.
mentality. But it really does allow you to be very present. And with what you're doing, presence in the very, very moment that your next step or whatever it is, right, is so important in just
Mm-hmm.
staying out of your own mind.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, to be when you're completely alone in these polar regions, your mind's going to wander. The beauty and the daunting nature of polar travel. Why I love it more than anything else I do is because nothing, in terms of at least voluntarily seeking it out, nothing offers that level of suffering than polar travel. One polar explorer from the 1900s said it beautifully when he said, "Polar exploration is at once the cleanest and most isolated way of having a bad time which has been devised." And I
Wow.
could not agree with more. I could not agree more. Like as an example, it often gets compared to, let's say, climbing Everest. Mountain climbing, which I've done plenty of, is a lot more dangerous, but it is not nearly as much suffering. Like when you're climbing a mountain, every day is different. The terrain is different. The experience of the day is different because the terrain is different. The views are different. You take rest days to acclimatize. If it's a big mountain, it's dynamic, so it's mentally more engaging. In polar travel, you're skiing into empty wide nothingness day after day after day, doing the same damn thing, dragging that very, very heavy sled. The monotony of it, the fact that also when you're on a mountain, like when I was on Denali, you're on the 16 ridge at 16,000 feet, and it's so thin, you're putting one foot in front of the other, and there's like 1,000+ foot drop on each side of you. And when you're in an environment like that, the environment forces you to flow. Your mind can't wander; it's right
Mm.
there, and then the next step, you could fall and die. In polar travel, it's just empty flat white nothingness. So your mind, the environment doesn't force you into flow, so your mind wanders, and that's daunting. It's brutal. It's absolutely a mind fuck. Like your mind will take you to places. It'll take you everywhere. It'll take you absolutely everywhere. And there's some times where you could be skiing and an hour could feel like a lifetime. There are other times where that hour could go by in an instant. And you have to navigate that dance of where consciousness will take you. And while extremely challenging, that to me is the draw of
Mm.
of that. The not just the physical suffering, because the physical suffering is great, and but it's the mental suffering that is the real draw.
So I could recognize that space of corralling your mind, but also allowing it to be free. It is a weird dance that you have to have it yourself, whether it be in meditation
Absolutely.
or, I practice jujitsu or trail running. Those are kind of my modalities. And your mind
Awesome.
will go to all these different places, some good, some bad, if you
Mm-hmm.
want to label it those things,
Mm-hmm.
write quotes around both of those. Um, and it's how you interface with those things that really make
Mm-hmm.
all the difference. Because when you're in the vacuum of a jujitsu mat or a sensory deprivation tank or a
Mm-hmm.
trail, or in your case, going across Siberia or whatever it may be, it is this, your mind is going to go to all these nooks and crannies. And, for me, I know I'll be thinking in the middle of a roll, like, oh, I have to go pick up this at CVS. And I'm like, someone's trying to fucking kill you right now. Don't worry about CVS, dummy. You know, but
Imagine that.
it's an escape from the moment, and then you have to pull yourself back into it. So I couldn't imagine being at such high risk and high reward, but still having that dance.
Yeah, I mean, it's brutal. It's extremely daunting, especially because again, you're in a place with no stimuli. It's just
Mm.
literally empty, flat nothingness. Other than a few sections of Antarctica where there'll be some mountains, for the most part, it's no stimuli. There's nothing to engage consciousness. There's no majestic views. I mean, yeah, it's beautiful in its own way, but it's not like a mountain landscape where there's things to kind of engage you. And so the mind, the mental games are daunting. But and ultimately it's not the suffering in and of itself I seek. That's the means, not the purpose for why I go. The purpose is what the suffering gives you. What the suffering gives you is that transcendence above it, that you're tapping into areas of the human soul that you cannot access without suffering. without solitude. You have to battle the dragon to find the treasure, and the bigger the dragon, the greater the treasure you on earth. So the places I get to go, and I'm not unaware that it's a privilege, right? Like I get to. I've been in war zones. I've worked with former child soldiers, with survivors of sex trafficking, with people in poverty. I've volunteered in leper colonies. I've been to post-conflict zones. And there's people who are born into hell on earth who don't have the luxury to choose their own suffering. I do. And it's a privilege, and I'm grateful for it. While there are moments that I fucking hate it because it is miserable, it's brutal, I'm very grateful for it because I do get to open doors into the human soul that gives me access to treasures that many don't get to access. My responsibility in this life is to bring those treasures back. And that's what I have these conversations with people like you, speak in places where I speak, write books, to share the wisdom that I gained from the edge, because everybody's battling their own version of a polar storm. Everybody's got their own Antarctica to cross. Everybody suffers. But because I get to go so far out onto the edge that is very rarely accessed, I get to be a messenger for the wisdom that the edge offers. And my responsibility, when I say that, it's because like when I was in Iraq, my vehicle drove over an active bomb that didn't explode. My friends drove over a bomb that exploded. I've faced death multiple times. And not only that, like I was born to a great life. Just because I was born where I was born, I was blessed a million times more opportunities than many people born into hell on earth. Hell that I've seen, right? Been there, witnessed, not just in movie, but lived, seen it, witnessed it firsthand. And so to me, I owe a debt for this life that I was born into, for the life that I've been gifted, for the life that I have. I'm not saying it's that paradigm is a quote unquote good way, and arguably even an unhealthy way. Many therapists have told me there's something wrong with how I think, which is fine, to each their own. But I believe there's a debt that I owe for this life, and I pay off that debt by bringing the wisdom from the edge back.
So I don't think there's anything, wrong with as your therapist frame it. I don't, is it extreme to some, but to your point, I think, I always, thinking is a rich man's problem, right? When you have all your hierarchy of needs met, right? When all your basic needs are met, then what else is there to do? Right? Like, just keep on filling out, get a bigger house, get a nicer car, get better clothes, right? Have better steak, right? These are all luxuries that we have, some of us. And you get to the top of that triangle that we all know so well. Do you just go back down to the bottom? Or for me, it's always been this idea of now another triangle meeting it at the tip and opening up, right? That's transcending, right? Opening up to whatever's on the other side of the top of that triangle of self-awareness. And it is through solitude, which is where I usually get mine, and whether it be meditation and mainly sensory deprivation, that you're able to open up these parts of you, this you want to call it your soul, communication with God. John C. Lilly, the inventor of the float tank, called it the absolute 0 point, which is something that I've experienced through sensory deprivation, where you are nothing. There is nothing to you. There is no family. There is no friends. There is no name. You are floating through eternity, but yet you're not. It's so hard to put into words, but it is a luxury. And if you have the ability, and for you to go to the outer edges of that experience and bring back the treasure that you find, or the experience you have, because everyone is doing their own trip across Antarctica in their own version. Exactly. And if we could take that and we could, make it our own, trauma is relative, that word gets thrown around a lot, but it's relative to the experience that you have. And Absolutely. You just allow yourself and are privileged to go to the extreme where most people are not going to go.
Yeah. And I'm grateful for it. And I get to play in some intense playgrounds, but it does present me an opportunity to gain access to these things that otherwise I wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you. I wouldn't be speaking in the places that I speak. It's that without having these experiences that shift the very fiber of my being. It's not even just reading a book. Reading a book is great. Listening to a podcast is great. It gives you knowledge, but wisdom is only gained from being in the arena, from being in the battleground, being on the battlefield, stepping into the arena, going to war. And then it becomes not just conscious understanding, but a visceral knowing. And there's a distinction. There's a distinction between conceptually understanding something through a cognitive, lens versus viscerally knowing it. There's an isness to knowing that when it's known, when it's embedded into the soul, when it's embodied in the fiber of your being, right, and you're deep in your subconscious in the recesses of it, and it lives there. Now it's a knowing, and that isness shifts who you are, because it's not a thought. A thought is like a layer above the isness, if that makes sense. The isness is who you are, and it becomes that. And then that shifts, that alone shifts what you get to be around. Like we were talking about, right? You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Why does that happen? Like, why do we take in human beings soak in the world implicitly? As children, we start soaking in the world implicitly. So when you shift, I mean, there's a reason why Gandhi once said, be the change you wish to see in the world, because when you shift, it helps shift the beings around you. So the places I get to go shift who I am, which allow me to not only share the things that I share in terms of verbally communicating them, but also in my beingness. And I'm grateful for the privilege that I get to play in this arena.
I love that you refer to it as a playground and play, because I think that's such a huge part of my experience as a father, is revisiting what it's like to have that innocence to life. And I think that that gets removed from us. Like I see it in my daughter, she's 8, totally. And I could see her soul slowly seeping out of her. And I know her essence, but I just see it through culture and through school and, how she wants to show up in the world. And my son, who's 4, is just pure, pure energy, pure soul. And there is a playfulness to life that I think we begin to forget very quickly. Totally. And so many people lose that playfulness, and it becomes a job and this and traffic and the mortgage, and we forget to play, man.
Yeah. I mean, I think innately, like we all, I'm an explorer in a sort of more in the more traditional sense of that word. I go explore. I mean, not in the ancient ways, like when people were exploring literally new lands that had never been discovered. Everywhere I go, there's still a map to, but an explorer of at least some pretty wild new worlds that are relatively untouched. But I think we're all explorers, and that's what you said. Like children have that sense of curiosity in the world, that sense of exploration. And the greatest journey that each of us can take is the journey within. The places I go without in the external world are ultimately a mirror for myself, but I go into those edges and I go into them because of what they unearth within. And everybody can take that journey. You don't have to go to the recesses of Antarctica. Now, again, going that far out offers greater depths that you can go into for sure. That's why I go. Like life in Antarctica, when you're on these things, the volume of life is dialed extremely high. The intensity of life. And that means the highs are very, very high, but the lows are also very, 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 very low. And that's part of the draw, is like in this condensed periods of time, you experience, in like this microcosm of the entire human experience, the entire human condition in this condensed period of time. That's the draw. But again, you can still access these places in your own playground. Like, for example, when the pandemic first hit, a lot of people were like, oh, I can't go to the gym to work out anymore. The parks are closed. And I was like, that's bullshit. You can still find a way. So to inspire people, I ran 50 miles around a cul-de-sac all night. It was just a tiny cul-de-sac, 1,000 loops of 0.05 miles. Like just going around and around this thing all night. Like you don't need a lot of space to find somewhere to go. And it was a beautiful place it sent me, within to tap into that. So there's always a way to create adventure, to create a playground. And, when I say, you'll hear me use words like battle and war and play simultaneously, because the playground is also a battleground. It's not like both those things coexist. Like it is a battleground in that I go to war with myself, but you bring play to that battle and they coexist as one. It's not, sometimes people think it's like this contradictory element, but they're not. They can very much coexist. And when you approach both those things as one, it changes the dynamic, with not just how you chase the next struggle, whatever your version of your worthy challenge is, whether it be, I don't know, running, playing guitar, everybody, like whatever the worthy struggle is, but also changes how you approach struggle when life throws it your way, which it inevitably does.
Yeah, I think that people get too caught up in, myself included, of course, that we get too caught up in this. It has to be one way or the other, and then there's that, proverbial question, well, why would God give children cancer? And you're like, well, on your street view, that's your world. But when you pan out and you can get a God view of the earth, and you pan out and pan out and pan out, it's all in balance. It's all perfectly balanced. It doesn't make rhyme or reason in the moment to certain people, of course, and that's very easy for me to say being where I am, but at the end of the day, it is all in balance. So there is this playfulness to the war, right? There is this seriousness and stress level to the play. And if you could, interact in both of those worlds and that duality of existence, it's not just black and white, it is gray. And that's where you're able to ebb and flow between and stay a little bit more balanced, if you will. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the podcast, do me a solid. Subscribe, rate, and review. And of course, spread the word, tell a friend, click the notification buttons, do all that good stuff. It is greatly, greatly appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Out of all the things you've done, is there one that stands out to you that really shifted things for you, whether it be perspective and insight? Was there one that stands out to you and say, that's the one that, I mean, I'm sure all of them you'll see on your highlight reel on your deathbed, but that's the one, that's the motherfucker right there.
I've gotten, every journey presents its own powerful awakenings. So it's hard to pin, because I've gotten that, like, I had that asked before, is there one that's more, but every journey has presented its own awakenings. I would say, like, in the recent times, I've been going into the darkness for 10 days, like even going to the darkness for 7 days the first time. It was what shifted my relationship to what I believe to be God. And we all have our own relationship to that word and to what God is. I mean, there was a time in my life I would have labeled myself an atheist. And I still don't have what one might call a conventional view of God, but I have my perspective to my relationship with a God. And so embracing the mysticism of the human experience, because the practical can coexist with the mystical, right? Like there can be these things, okay, with an explanation for it, understanding to it, but there can be things that, like, why does that happen? Why did my bomb not explode and my friends did? I don't know. One could call it coincidence. Maybe it is. I don't know. But But the point of that is not, like, we can try to find all the answers in the world to that, but I don't know the answer, and I will never know that answer. That's the mysticism of the universe. We find meanings to it, we create meanings to it, but there's also value in surrender to the mysticism. So the darkness taught me the beauty of that surrender, and again, that coexists with the practical. Like, science and spirituality can coexist, right? In life, there's all these dualities, these two seemingly contradictory forces. Like play and pain and pleasure, contentment, discontentment, ego, humility, masculine, feminine, darkness, light, stress, recovery, fear, nirvana, all these forces that we often frame as polar opposites, but they can coexist, and they have to coexist. They do coexist. Like, too much stress is bad, but too much recovery is also bad. And often we demonize one side of it. Like we say, oh, stress is bad, ego is the enemy. That's fucking nonsense. Ego has its place, just as humility does. Discontentment is not bad. Discontentment has its place. If you look at the ego, the duality of darkness and light, darkness is not bad. Darkness, we all have our shadow self. We all have confronted darkness. When you stop demonizing one side of it, it becomes a place to engage, a place to tap into, a place to play in. And now you not only increase the range of the human life in terms of what you get to experience in this life that we're gifted with, but it gives you new places to go, new weapons to access in the battleground of life, right? In the playground of life. It gives you new tools because you've gone to other edges. I'll give you a very concrete example. It was a while ago, actually. Now, I remember going for a run, and I saw this sign that said 5K fun run. And I had a visceral disgust at the idea of a fun run. Like, you don't run for fun. You should only suffer. And that was silly. Like, it wasn't healthy. It was
There's
funny,
no such thing as a turkey trot. Fuck a turkey trot.
Exactly. Everything should be suffering. And the problem with that is I was like bringing in suffering in every area of my life, And so, and I was like, all right, if you look at the duality of play and suffering, and again, don't get caught up in the semantics of it. Use whatever label you want. Sure. But play and suffering is what I called it, right? Like, all right, I'm really clearly one who thrives on the edge of suffering. Let me go more into play. and let me do like a fun run where I don't measure the miles. Let me listen to music, fun music, be dancing, be silly, be playful, watch a funny show, right? Do playful things. Now, I'm always going to be one who leans, if you look at that particular duality on a scale, I'll always be one who leans to suffering, to the edge of that duality. But now that I've accessed play and gone and played in that arena, played on that side of that duality, of that side of that scale, I have new places to go, new places to look, even when I'm suffering. I can be more playful in my arena, in my craft. And it just improves your depth of life, your range of the human condition. Because if you stay with doing what you've always done, you're only going to keep getting more of what you always gotten. And we don't know what we don't know. So to start even figuring out what we don't know, you got to go somewhere where you've never been before, right? So go onto another edge of another duality. Go far out onto an edge, and suddenly something, oh, like, wow, that's a new place to look. That's a new door that I haven't opened before. Now, what do I see on those? What do I unearth in those doors? What treasures do I find? Great, I can bring them back with me to life, to whatever my path is, craft is.
So many things I wrote down there, and so many things I want to talk about. One thing I do want to go back to, and I'll try not to stack my questions, but you mentioned, the idea of surrender, right? And conceptually, we all understand that, right? We all understand, like, okay, there's a letting go to life, right? It's the Bruce Lee be water idea, right? Like there is this overall letting go to life that, when you're able to do it, you feel pretty good. But that's conceptually, right? But there is a shift there where you have to take the conceptually and shift it to an actual feeling. And that's where the truth of that surrender, the truth of that letting go, I think that's the term you used, really starts to resonate itself within you, right? Experientially, you might fill out the C bubble that says letting go. Okay, good. Got that answer correct. But there's a knowing to what that letting go is. And if you could have that experientially and lean into that and immerse that out of you, you are more likely to lean into that space when it's needed rather than just know what it is conceptually. You can read Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins front to back every day, but if you don't feel the letting go, you'll never actually let go.
So like a way that when I was at a point playing on the duality of control and surrender. Like at every point in my life, I'm finding one duality causing me friction, and I go play on the other end of it. So for example, I'm a giant control freak, right? My world is in my hands. I will control my fate. That's valid. There's value to that thing, to that way of being, to that mindset. Then I was like, all right, I want to play with surrender. So one of the ways I was ingraining it, I had a little book I would carry around, and every time there was we all experience these moments in our life. We're like, whoa, that's so wild that happened, right? Like, what are the odds of that happen? Like, for example, I was doing an 8-hour tire drag at night here in Arizona, dragging these 2 heavy tires, fucking miserable. And I didn't feel like going I was doing it at night to add in the sleep deprivation element. And so I didn't want to go. I was like burnt out already, just tired even starting it. Like, this sucks. And in the first hour, I meet this woman who, she had a husky. She had a dog that was part Arctic wolf. Arctic wolf is what I consider my spirit animal. And seeing an Arctic wolf in Arizona, that was the first time I saw an Arctic wolf, and never since. And that lady was with me. Who knows, right? Maybe it was just a figment of my imagination. But that lady, like, not only did she have this part Arctic wolf, that the way, like, I felt that presence, and then she started chatting with me, because I get stopped a lot when people see me tire dragging, like, what the hell are you doing?
Sure.
And people ask me about it, but rarely do people ask why and go into a deeper conversation. And Beautiful. She did. And so I remember writing this down, like, what are the odds that happened on that day? Never since seen it, an Arctic wolf. And so anytime there was something like that, like these life experiences we all go through, they're like, whoa, that's so weird that happened. And it's valuable to bring conscious awareness to it, as opposed to just letting it slide. And you can call it coincidence, whatever your paradigm is. But to me, there's value in seeing it as something in mysticism in the universe. So I was practicing surrendering to the mysticism, like surrendering to the most of what happens in our life is beyond our control, and embracing the beauty in that. Like even when I was skiing in the Arctic, I was just came back from an expedition out there training for Antarctica, and one day after two brutal polar storms, I was skiing with a heavy sled in very soft snow. Now it's easy to be like, "Fuck, I wish the snow was harder. It would have been easier conditions if the snow was harder." But instead, I just kept saying, "Thank you, God, for these perfect conditions."
Mm.
Because they were perfect. Because they could. Everything is perfect in its isness because it cannot be anything other than what it already is. And I'm going to say this again because if you own this concept, it will change how you engage with life. Everything is perfect in its isness, for it cannot be anything other than what it is. We often wish for things to be other than what they are. And I'm not saying don't fight to create a reality that you don't like, right? Like exercise, fight for the world you want to create. But on that journey, there's going to be a shitload of things happening that are beyond your control. Like in that instance, the weather, the storms, the soft snow. It's easy to say, fuck, I hope it doesn't snow tomorrow in these conditions. I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. I hope snow is better. You don't control that. Instead, you could say, I hope the weather tomorrow will be exactly what it is. If you hope for the weather to be exactly what it is, you will 100% of the time get what you want. 100% of the time, because you will get that. And it sounds like a simple thing, but if you view your life that way, I hope, and the weather is just an example, in any condition of things you can't, I hope the day tomorrow, how it shows up, will be exactly what it is. You will 100% get what it is, what you pray for, what you hope for, if you hope for those things, So everything is perfect in its isness when you accept the isness. And I don't just mean externally, even internally, right? Like, because most of even our emotions, we don't control. They're responses to stimuli beyond our control. Like right now, if somebody comes into this room with a gun, that as I'm sitting here talking to you, my brain's going to feel fear. My brain's going to feel fear in response to an external stimuli. I'm not pausing to say, hey, I'm choosing to feel fear. My brain's going to register a fear response because it sees a risk. That's a valuable response. But what do we do even with fear? We demonize it. Fear is bad. I shouldn't feel it. Be fearless. Don't be scared. That's fucking nonsense. It's like fear is just a response. When I accept the isness of that emotion, now I can, from the place of acceptance of the isness, I can now create a space between that emotion and who I choose to be outside of it. Like a good way to apply this is Buddha once said, we're all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. The first dart is the thing we don't control. So, for example, I was taking a friend out rock climbing. It was like on a scramble, not super hard for me at least. And she was, like a decent scramble. And she was super terrified. She's terrified, like I'm scared. We finally get to the top, come back down. And she's beating herself up. She was like, you were bouncing around this scramble like a mountain goat. You weren't scared. What's wrong with me? Why am I scared? And just beating herself up. And the fact of the matter is, the only reason I wasn't scared was not because I was braver. It's because I had done a shitload of much harder climbing that my brain had more references to say this scramble is not a risk. She had not done that climbing. So it took actually courage on her part to make that climb. It took no courage on my part to make that climb, right? Because I didn't have fear. If they don't have fear, there's no courage. So you have to have fear for courage. So it took courage on her part. The problem was not the fear. The problem was the second dart. The first dart, and don't get caught up in, is the first dart the external stimuli or is the first dart the emotion? That's not really the point. The point is the second dart is when you consciously step in and choose how you respond to the stimuli. That point of power is what you do when you step into the realm with consciousness and effort. So instead of saying, what's wrong with me? Why did I choose to, why was I scared? What, like you weren't scared, I'm weak and all that kind of stuff. Hey, got it. I felt fear. I couldn't control it. My brain saw this as a risky situation. Got it. It felt fear. Awesome. I had courage because I moved through the fear. The second dart is the point of power. There's a space between the emotion and who you choose to be outside that emotion. And there is no emotion is bad. No emotion is bad. We hear demonized emotions too. Like guilt, for example. I struggled with survivor's guilt when I came back from the war. Everybody told me not to feel guilty. Therapists, friends, family, and I get it. I'm rationally well aware in war, bullets fly where they fly. You can't control that. But emotionally, the guilt was not the problem. It was the demonization of that guilt. Guilt was only an expression of love for my brother. Guilt is a beautiful expression of love. It's because I gave a shit that I felt guilty. So what I did was I changed my relationship to the guilt. I put a picture of my friend up on my wall and it said, this should have been you. Earn this life. My guilt became my ally. I still feel like you heard me say it. I still believe I owe a debt for this fucking life. That's to me. You could call it what you want. The world could tell me that's an unhealthy way of looking at life. I don't care. It works beautifully. And I'm not miserable. I fucking couldn't love life more. I'm extremely happy. I love my life. But my guilt is my ally. My pain is my ally. My demons are my ally. My beauty, my joy is my ally. When you play on both realms, the shadow, the light, and the dark, everything becomes a place for you to use to create a more beautiful and blissful life.
Hello, friends. How are you? Just want to take a quick, brief break from the podcast, talk about a piece of gear that I've been rocking nonstop, and that's Wowie shorts. WowieLife.com, the Nomad 2.0s. They are super diverse. They're super comfortable. They've got this unique little stylish trim on the pocket, different on each color. I got them in green. I got them in blue. The black are in the laundry. They come with a lining, so you don't have to waste a pair of underwear, which is huge. I wear them to jiu-jitsu. I wear them on the trail. I wear them to the beach. I wear them out to dinner. They're super diverse. They're super comfortable. They're family owned, which is always awesome. And they just released a new pair of sweatpants called the Ramblers and the Flow, which they are so dope. I can't get enough of them. I wear them all the time. They're pretty much the only pair of shorts I'm rocking these days. And for listeners of this podcast, you can get 15% off of your entire purchase with the promo code VBShow. So head on over to WowieLife.com. Grab yourself a pair of the Nomad 2.0s. Those are my personal favorite, and you will not regret it. Check them out, WowieLife.com. Now back to the show. Reacting versus responding, right? That's
Exactly.
and realizing that there is a time in between there where you have a choice, and that is
Exactly.
a superpower. That is a superpower to be able.
Absolutely.
You are freezing time. You are freezing time from something that triggers you, and I can't stand that word anymore, but something that triggers you to how you show up in the world in that very next moment. And I think one of the best vehicles for that, or to discover that, or to harness that, or to sharpen that blade, is through silence and introspection. And for me, again, sensory deprivation. For you, I'm sure the darkness will, and I want to go into that. But that is one of the most powerful tools that any human being can cultivate, and something that you could teach. Like, I try to teach my children that all the time. I'm like, take a minute. Like, don't just jump, right? Because it is so in our, and you know, I think a very powerful tool for me is I call out the feeling. You know, if I feel that my kids, if I feel that my kids are pushing my buttons, I would literally like, guys, daddy's getting to that point, right? And it almost gives me a buffer. It gives me a little bit more string to be like, okay, now I'm speaking it out. So now they're aware of it. I'm feeling it, and I'm bringing that awareness to my body and to my words and to my mind. And now I'm able to actually slow it down even more so. Yeah. And then they go, okay, it's time to cut the shit.
Yeah. Neuroscience has actually shown when you label an emotion, it reduces activity in the emotional parts of the brain and the limbic brain, and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with focus and awareness. So it's literally exactly what you said. It's creating that space. It's saying, all right, I'm feeling fear. Got it. Let me pause, acknowledge its presence. It doesn't mean it goes away. The point is not to make it go away. The point is to acknowledge its presence so you can choose, so you can respond instead of reacting.
Well, you could also alchemize it, right? And you could actually turn it into something that's positive.
Exactly.
You know, it's the old anxiety is excitement just masked with fear, right? Exactly. It's that same exact thing. So when my daughter or whomever is, oh, I'm feeling anxious, or I had something going on, I was like, I'm feeling so anxious. Like, no, dude, you're excited. Like, don't lean into the negative space. Like, yeah, it's our default to lean into that space. Survivor mechanism. I get all that. But you have the cognitive ability to stop yourself and not let that snowball of anxiety get out of control and go, oh no, I'm not anxious. I'm stoked. And then you can reframe it, repurpose it, and use that energy more accordingly and more efficiently to have a result that hopefully will be better, because you don't have control at the end of the day anyway, because whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to go back to that sled pull at night that you were kind of really not wanting to do, and really just coming up against all the hurdles in your mind and body and all those things. I call those valid humanistic excuses, right? Because you have all the validity humanistically to not go out and pull that sled. You have all the reason and all of the it's hot, I don't want to do this shit, blah blah blah. Do you think that overcoming, because this is something I often kind of interface with, do you think that overcoming that is warranted? Like, do you have to overcome that, or can you lean into the excuse, or is an excuse an excuse an excuse an excuse?
I mean, the more you lean into the excuse, the more that's gonna shape your reality. You don't. I mean, nobody has to do shit, but if you want to create a better life, the point of doing that is not just to get the results. Like, look, it's almost like obvious. If I do the hard thing, I'll get the result, right? I don't feel like running today. If I run and I keep doing it, I'm going to lose the weight I want to lose, so on and so forth, right? You'll get the results. But it's not just about the results. It's going to improve your experience of life. That's the fucking transcendence, is going through that moment. This really sucks. I don't want to do it. And I do it. The beauty is in the battle. The beauty is in the battle, not the results are a side effect. But it's doing that. It's going to war with yourself, that you find that power you have within you. You cannot know your strength without struggle. You cannot know courage without fear. You cannot know your power without pain. And so one might say, then why even care to know it? You can stay, not do it, keep listening to excuses. Your life will temporarily feel comfortable in not. It was more comfortable to sit my ass on the couch than go out and do that tire, for sure. But that's the reason why most people are living lives of quiet desperation, as Henry David Thoreau said, right? That we're living in that life of quiet desperation. Yeah, because we're staying stuck in that world. You want to go do that hard thing. Like, if you look for the worthy struggle, the challenge, your life will become better. Your life will become easier. So it's not just about getting results. It's about experiencing the transcendence of going to war with yourself and winning. And that's a fucking majestic feeling. Like, that's the human experience. That's the reason why human beings, when you ask them who you admire, why do we say, we always look at somebody who's gone, regardless of the name, they've gone through adversity, they've transcended it, right? That's the human spirit is rising above that. And so we're tapping into that within ourselves. I could live an extremely comfortable life for the rest of my life. Now my parents have money, I have a decent amount. I could not do shit for the rest of my life, probably, if I wanted to. I would never fucking choose that. I seek out immense amounts of suffering because there's value. And don't get me wrong, as I said, I'm not unaware that I get to. It's a privilege. And that's why I bring the treasures back. That's why I have tremendous gratitude that I get to do it. And that's why I go to places like post-conflict zones to bring the work, not just to places I speak in the US, but to go on those edges too.
God damn it. I wanted to lean into the valid humanistic excuses, but listen, at the end of the day, I know I have the awareness around it that, like, if I really reverse engineer it, really get down to it, it's a fucking excuse. That's why it's called a valid humanistic excuse, right?
And look, to be clear too, one quick point is, like, I'm not saying there's days where you might need recovery. Like, there's days I've gone to war with myself enough times where I know the difference between I'm just being a lazy piece of shit and I got to get out the door anyway, versus, you know what, today recovery will actually be better for me than doing the training thing. Like, there's recovery sometimes is more, that's how you get stronger, is being very on point with your recovery game as well. So I'm not saying there's not days you don't need that, but it takes a lot of self-awareness to know the difference between, do I need recovery or am I just being lazy?
Right. It goes back to that, that idea of that concept of surrender, knowing it and feeling it, right? Like, is this a true, and your mind will play those tricks on you. Like, oh no, you need the rest. You need, and
exactly.
You're like,
but you have,
really? I don't know.
The only way you start knowing that is doing enough of, like you said, the stillness, the solitude, the self-awareness work. So you know what voice is speaking to you.
I want to go back to one thing you mentioned, that you said that it changed your relationship or your definition of God. And if you don't mind, what was it before? I know you said you were probably atheist, if you had to put a label on it. What changed, and what is your new definition of God?
Great question. So for me, I don't believe in a higher power God. I believe God is humanity at its finest. God is when a guy jumps on a grenade to save another human being. Why is it when we see pain, we see compassion? Why do we feel compassion when I see pain? What is it about that? Like, why should I give a shit? I believe that's an expression of God that shines through us. It's tapping into this ethereal force that allows us to be the highest, greatest version of ourselves and tap into something beyond. Like, when I say beyond ourselves, again, I don't personally believe it's a higher power. I think it's beyond the mortal realm of me as a man. I'm tapping into, call it, the collective spirits of all the the beings that came before me, tapping into the warrior energy, tapping into something greater. Like a great example is, Desmond Doss. Have you seen Hacksaw Ridge,
I have not.
the movie? Great movie. The movie touched my soul. That movie, and actually the book by Harold Kushner, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, really helped. And then life experience combined with those two sources helped create my relationship and definition of God. Like in the movie, which is based on a true story, Desmond Doss, he pulled 75 people off a cliff. This was an actual Medal of Honor recipient. It's not just a movie. He was a Medal of Honor recipient in World War II. And he pulled 75 people off a cliff, sometimes dragging them as far as a football field. Here's a tiny, skinny guy doing that. I've dragged people when I was in the Marines. That shit's fucking hard. Pulling 75 people off a cliff, it's impossible. But he did it. And why did he do it? After every person, he was saying, please, God, help me get one more. He didn't say, please, God, save these people, and I'm just going to hang out in the back. He said, please, God, help me get one more. So in the Harold Kushner, he says, to me, the surest proof of the existence of God is that when people pray for strength, hope, and courage, they find a level of strength, hope, and courage they didn't have before it. So to me, praying to God is not about bargaining to get things. Hey, God, if I do this, you give me $1 million, right? It's no. I'm praying to access something deeper within myself to do the thing, whatever the thing. And so I believe God is just that spirit, it's a force that we all have. It's the thing that makes me cry when I see somebody in pain. It's the compassion, it's the love, it's the transcendence. That's God. It's the oneness of all that is.
Yeah, I cry over everything. I cry over
Likewise.
everything. Yeah, I cry over everything. I proudly, I proudly cry. I'm like, yeah, I cry over everything.
Me too.
I can cry right now.
Yeah, me too, brother.
Yeah, man. You mentioned the word warrior, and I think that's a really tough word. And I'm not sure if you ever read the King, the Magician, Warrior, and Lover. But it's
heard those archetypes.
Yeah, it's a book basically on the duality of all those different roles that men play, right? And there is the warrior and there's the soldier, right? And I was actually thinking of this one day on my way to jiu-jitsu, that I just had this like energy that I wanted to be like a Viking, right? Just like stormed like or the traditional cultural Viking that we know, right? Who knows? But like just this like rage. And then I caught myself. I was like, there's also the samurai, right? Who's just as badass, just as deadly. But he doesn't attack. He doesn't storm the beaches. He moves and he's graceful. And again, these are stereotypes, but you get my point. And there is this warrior versus soldier. And being someone who's been at war, how did you enter that space and how did you leave? So I guess as a leading question, did you enter a soldier and leave a warrior? And how has that kind of impacted your life on like a day-to-day?
Yeah. So, I don't think, to your point, I don't think to be a warrior, you have to be a soldier, right? Like being in the military, a warrior is anybody. A warrior is one, I believe, to me, like I'm able to do the hard thing. I'm able to go to war with myself in service of not just my higher self, but in service of something and some mission and someone else. You're being able to go, what's a warrior does, going to war with oneself. For something greater, and again, it's not just even for an outside cause, even for the higher version of myself. Like when I say that is, okay, it's really hard for me to go to the gym today. Doing the warrior thing is I'm going to go do that hard thing because it's in service of the better version of me, in service of the future me that I want to be, not the one that I don't want to be, right? So a warrior is something any human being can tap into. That warrior spirit lives within all of us. Like one of my favorite quotes of all time is from Vince Lombardi, who said, I firmly believe any man's finest hour, the greatest fulfillment to all he holds dear, is when he has worked his heart out in good cause and lies exhausted on the field of battle, victorious. So a warrior is one who steps into their respective battles, and sportsmen are a great example of that. Athletes, right? Kobe was a fucking warrior, man. That guy was a goddamn legend, right? Like he's an absolute legend. That's someone I admire greatly. And the soldier is, in the, again, conventional term, the word, like, yeah, you're going to war in a literal sense. As a Marine, that's what I did. But that warrior ethos was built by the Marines for sure. And now it's just it just shows up in a different way.
Yeah, I just finished the book Iron John. I'm going to paraphrase, but he says like a warrior fights for the state. A soldier fights for the state. The warrior fights for the cosmos.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah, it's a great.
Never heard.
I'll send you the exact quote, but it's a
Yeah.
great book. But another
Yeah.
book about kind of encompassing the male energy that we
Mm-hmm.
interface with, and especially in this
Mm-hmm.
culture now where that word toxic masculinity gets so thrown around so easily, and you do have
Yeah.
these different representations of what a man is. I think being someone who facilitates a men's group and leans into that male mental health element of things. I think it's really important for guys like you to show up in the world who are doing really hard shit, who have had really difficult physical challenges and endeavors, but to show up in this spiritual way and in this warrior of the cosmos, if you will, where it's
Mm-hmm.
not just about the tangible, but there is this spiritual element to you that's backed by science. Like we're seeing that more and more now.
Mm-hmm.
To talk a little bit about the spirituality that you've encountered and how you've kind of done the research, because that's a big part of your book, is not
Mm-hmm.
just like the woo woo, which I love a good woo woo, but there is something behind that that is actually happening.
Yeah, and this is where again the duality of science and spirituality can coexist. Like in my book Fearvana, you read it, like it's every point is defended by research. I did a ton of research for that book. Every point had to be explained, even to myself, let alone to someone else. And today, coming back to that point we were talking about earlier, is embracing more of the mysticism of the universe. Because again, they can coexist. They still value reading research, but the human will cannot be measured in a lab, man. I mean, doctors thought it'd be impossible to climb Everest without supplementary oxygen. Reinhold Messner went out there and did it. Two doctors told me Marine Corps boot camp would kill me because of a blood disorder I was born with that transports significantly less oxygen, 25 to 30% less oxygen in my body than what is supposed to be, than what a normal man has. Two doctors, hematologists, blood doctors, told me boot camp would kill me. It obviously did not. I've lost 2 fingers to frostbite. They said almost certainly that your thalassemia blood disorder contributed to that because there's less oxygen flowing through you on extremes. It's not going to stop me because the human will, the human spirit cannot be measured in a lab, man. So I value research, I take it, but I go to war with myself, and that's where you tap into that spirituality, the transcendence, the God, and that's available to you anywhere. Like another example of how I tapped into God, like in a more sort of less extreme way. I had gotten this beautiful review on my book Fearvana on Amazon. I know the person who wrote it. She was a client of mine. She wrote this. She loved the book. And I remember I was in India at the time. She was in the US. And I read the review. And I could have easily been like, oh, sweet. I got a nice review. Awesome. Felt good and moved on. But I paused for a second. I just thought about this. Okay. Here's a woman on the other end of the world. At the time, I was in India. She was in the US. Other end of the world. Every force that has affected my life up to this day, every force, my parents who've changed my life, Viktor Frankl's book who've changed my life, Gary Gordon and Randy Sugar, Medal of Honor recipients from Black Hawk Down, the incident as well as the movie, who died and who their courage changed my trajectory of my life and inspired me to move in a more positive direction. Every soul that has interacted with my world has now changed me, and that has changed her because of the book that came through, not just because I wrote it, because of every force that has created me as a being to lead to this book has now changed her. And when you pause to think about that, the amount of life that has come together in that moment, right? It transcends space, it transcends time, it transcends life and death. I've never met so many people who've changed my life forever, like Viktor Frankl, like Gary Gordon, right? Like Randy Sugar. Never met these people, but they've changed the trajectory of my life. And therefore, anyone who's impacted by my work has now been impacted by their work, even if they've never heard their name, even if somebody had never heard the name of Gary Gordon, right? That person, his life has been changed. And simply by pausing to bring awareness to that, it was connecting souls across time, space, life, and death. And that was God, man.
Mm.
That was God. That's oneness. We are all in this. It's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing, right? The
I
six
was
degrees of
just,
separation.
I
When you
was just
when
thinking
you like
that.
that, right? Like it's that, right? Like when you pause to think about it, we are all interconnected. Like, I mean, even like right now, as I'm sitting here having this conversation, do you realize the amount of people that had to come together to build this computer that I'm talking to you on, right? The hundreds of different chips in there, the every element in the wall behind you. Somebody cut that wood, somebody built, like if you just think about the amount of lives that came together to make this moment a reality. Now day to day, I'm like, we weren't until I talked about it, we weren't thinking about it. So I'm not saying like we were always going to be thinking about it, but when you pause to bring awareness to that, and I just think about the amount of lives that came together to to build this chair I'm on, to build the wall there, and every element. It's like, dude, hundreds, thousands, potentially millions of lives have come together to build this moment and make it possible. That's God. That's the oneness.
That
That's
that's mind blowing and it's overwhelming, but it doesn't mean it's not true. It's one
yeah.
time I was meditating on my grass and no substances, and I was sitting there, I was looking at one blade of grass. One. I was looking at this blade of grass, I go, holy shit. There's a lot of fucking grass in the world. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
staring at this one blade of grass in my front
Mm-hmm.
yard. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
think how many blades of grass there are. And
Mm-hmm.
it's that same concept. It's like we get so caught up and we build this momentum in a life, and we never stop, and not even to smell the roses, but just to observe them, just to look
Yeah.
at them, the pigmentation, the how they carve out their shape against the sky or against the book. It is awe inspiring when you stop and you really just
Absolutely.
look at everything. It's surreal. And that's where you can go into
Yeah.
we're all plugged into the matrix or whatever, whatever avenue you want to go down. But when you step back and you look at how spectacular life really is, down to like whatever, it's all really just amazing. Hey guys, just want to take a quick break from the podcast to talk about something I'm super passionate about, and that is men's mental health. For those of you who may not know, I am a certified life coach, but I prefer the term journeyman for hire. And 4 years ago, I started the Council of Dudes, a men's group that has monthly meetings to lean on each other, to have open and honest conversations, to build community. So if you're a guy and you're looking to find like-minded individuals to help you see your blind spots and point out some insights and perspectives they may have in their own life, head on over to vinnybrusco.com, click the Council of Dudes banner, and sign up and join the council.
Absolutely, brother. It really is when you pause to acknowledge and appreciate it and just get the awareness for it, even from time to time. I'm not saying do it all the time because it'll kind of slow down. Like, might be hard to do things if you're just constantly thinking about it. But from time to
Right.
time, pause and bring awareness to it. And God, it's beautiful, man. It's majestic.
It's awe-inspiring, and it is very
Really?
overwhelming. It's super overwhelming. And I think nature really, really sharpens that sword and fine tunes that point, because it's unapologetic. It's
Yeah.
it's it's a part of us. When you're out in nature and you're just looking at the plush grass or the leaves or the simplest things, and we just take it for granted as just, no, it's just a tree. It's wild that we just take that for granted
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I
You
feel you,
mentioned
brother.
you mentioned Viktor Frankl. Obviously, his book "Man's Search for Meaning," a very impactful book for me, creating logotherapy and the idea of man in constant, we live these lives. You mentioned it before, of quiet desperation, and we go on a journey of the self, right? And I think it's a reintroduction to who we were before culture stripped us of our purity, whether it be at 8 years old or whatever experiences you've had. That book for me was just unbelievable, right? It's so many amazing quotes that you use and just that kind of echo through time. To your point, what do you think man is in search of besides meaning? Obviously, meaning is a very broad term, but if you had to put what he meant in that book, meaning, what is man's meaning?
I think it's up to us to create what that is. Like, I don't think there's an inherent meaning in life. I think each of us has to find the meaning. I think it was Joseph Campbell who said, "It is a waste to be asking the question when you are the answer." And it's up to us to find meaning, not just the meaning into the circumstances that life gives us, but the meaning to our own place on earth. I'm doing these things on the edge. Is that the only path to transcendence and enlightenment? Certainly not. Like I love watching, let's say, stand-up comedy. I'm not a stand-up comic. I would never perform as well as some of the comedians I love. Their role is that's the place, the meaning they've cultivated in this reality. And they are bringing joy to people like myself, who I could not do what they do. And I'm sure they would say they could not do what I do. Right. And so we collectively play our roles to create a sum that is greater than each individual part. When we come together in doing that, like, this is my role. This is not the role. It's not the way to live. It's not the right way to live. It's my way to live, and it's a way to live, is the things I do, is my place to access transcendence and God and enlightenment. But I think it's up to us, each of us, to find that, to bring meaning to our lives, and to find the thing that gives us the, not just meaning to this life, but the experience of being alive, the experience of the bliss in the human condition, the awe. Like, you should ask yourself, how often do you feel awe? How often do you experience awe? Just 2 nights ago, man, I was sitting outside up on my roof looking out of the night sky. Every once in a while I can't sleep because I get fear about what's coming in Antarctica. And I was looking out of the night sky, and I see the stars and the moon. And I don't get a night sky in Antarctica because it's 24 hours daylight. So night sky, I don't get sunrises, sunsets, night sky, which are some of my favorite times of day. And I'll probably go look at the sunset after this, right? Like later this evening. And I just felt awe looking at it. I felt bliss looking at it. I felt sad that I miss it when it's gone. But that was an expression of the greater gratitude that I had, So and that's what's a big reason why I encourage playing on the edge. It's not, again, the edges that I go to. Like, when you know what it's like to be without, you will appreciate what it's like to be with. Go on a 5-day fast and then eat food and tell me what that food tastes like. When I came out of 7 days of darkness, I did the 7 days first time, 10 days the second time. And the way the world looked in those few minutes, I've never seen the world look so bright. I've never seen the luminosity of the light shine that way. And I remember thinking this deep sense of visceral gratitude for all the pain I've experienced in my life, from coming back from the war, feeling PTSD, depression, alcoholism, was on the verge of suicide. And I have tons of other, like, all the pain, the life experience, the pain, because I remembered in a very visceral way recognizing that I could not know the light unless I've first been in the dark. I could not see the world that way that I saw it without having first stepped into the darkness. And that's the value. That's one of the many reasons playing on the edge. It gives you that appreciation for dude. I have tremendous gratitude for a night sky, for a day, for people around me. I'm about to go for 110 days alone. And so every time I'm with people, one of my friends pointed out the other day, she was like, I feel like gratitude is your superpower because you're always expressing tremendous gratitude. And I don't do it in like a fake way. I feel it. I feel it because I know it's all gone, and again, you don't have to go to Antarctica to feel that, but just bring more awareness to it. Go play on some edges, like do a cold shower. Tell me how much you appreciate a hot shower after that. I'm like, every hot shower I take, I'm like, this is fucking awesome because I know it's all about to be gone soon, So, like, just, yeah, amplifying awe in life. I think I got sidetracked a little bit from your question, but the key is like bringing that meaning. So you find your version of meaning to create your craft, your path. And then can you feel more alive in this human experience?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a big part of that journey towards feeling more alive, or to find that meaning, is that play. And it is that balance of play and stillness, and spending. I've done sensory deprivation, as I mentioned, and an hour and a half is the longest I was in the tank. And as I mentioned before, I did experience, I've had multiple experiences that I couldn't even put into words, but one of them was, I know you've spoken about this before, was this, the only way I could explain it was, other than the 0 point, but the only way I could explain it was, it felt like there was a flashlight behind a black piece of construction paper, and it was just peering through, and I felt this feeling from which I now is the golden thread, this feeling from the center of my chest to just fall into it, just to let go and to fall into it. And I remember having this internal dialogue, and the internal dialogue was saying, not yet. I was like, no, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to lean into it. And I was like, you're not ready. I was like, I'm ready. Let's go. It's like, you're not ready. I was like, I'm ready. And then it said, you're ready? Let's go. And for a hair of time, I hesitated. And it literally
Mm,
came back and said, "You're not ready." And that's okay. And I said, "Well,
mm,
when it'll happen?" It said, "Next time." I said, "Well, when's next time?" I said, "Next time's next time." And it
mm.
really does boil down to that. And I know you
That's pretty,
spoke about that light that you saw in the darkness, that,
yeah.
and if you want to call that enlightenment, whatever you want to frame that as, it's
Mm,
amazing. And it goes to your point that through the darkness, there is light on the other side of it. Through all the noise, there is silence.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And you got to go into that silence to really start to hear, you know? Only in the silence will you really start to hear the things like you said that you heard in the deprivation tank. You don't get to hear that. Call it the voice of your subconscious, the voice of the universe, the voice of God, whichever paradigm fits your reality. You hear those voices in silence and stillness. One of the many reasons why I go do what I do, to spend 110 days alone. I'm going to hear things that I don't get to hear otherwise. And that's not always easy, but it's fucking beautiful.
Yeah. It is really, and it's real. That's the thing. Like the reality that you interface with every day, right? That so many people take for granted. That's real. But there is an experience, and it goes, and again, to that 0 point that I experienced, that's as real as this conversation. I can't even put into words what I felt,
Yeah.
but it was fucking real. Like
That's the
like, you could call it a DMT chemical release, whatever you want to frame it as,
yeah,
whatever was
yeah,
actually
yeah,
happening, it was
yeah.
fucking real.
I get it completely. I've experienced those light shows and those conversations in the darkness, man. I had what I call a conversation with God that left me bawling in tears when I was did the 10 days in darkness. And
Would you
it
want
was
to
as real as this conversation.
would you care to share some of that conversation?
Happy to share all of it, man. So what happened was I was 5 days into the dark, and it gets really hard to sleep in there because what happens is you start seeing lights, and the lights are pretty constant. And so when you try to sleep, I would see these flashing white lights here in the right in the peripheral, and you could close your eyes, but the lights are still there because you're in a dark
You
room.
don't even know if your
And
eyes
so
are
the lights
closed.
exactly. I often didn't. I wouldn't be able to tell if my eyes were open or closed. So I was getting really frustrated. I couldn't sleep, and I was like, "Oh, fuck, I'm really tired now. I can't sleep." This flashing light kept was keeping me awake. So I just sat up on my bed and started meditating. And I said, "God, I surrender. Just take me wherever you need to take me." And I don't remember how long this lasted. I don't remember how long it. I don't have any sense of how long it was because obviously there's no sense of time. I also don't remember how this quote unquote conversation started. The first thing I remember was seeing an arrow in front of me in these lights. It was an arrow pointing up, and it said, "Follow me." I said, "Where?" And said, "Don't worry, just follow." And I started seeing these kind of like this white cylindrical thing in front of me. And I said, "What am I supposed to see?" I'm not sure. It said, "Look deeper, look harder." And I wasn't able to see it. And then this light was like going kind of a ray of light started moving up and to the right above me into what became a ball of light. And above this ball of light was like the universe, like blackness. There was depth to the darkness, almost like looking at a night sky and seeing the whole universe. And I heard this voice say, "I am everywhere." And then this light burst, and there was these green, like bright green light crystals kind of falling. And it said, "I am life, I'm in everything." And then the light kind of fell in front of me and like dissipated right in front of me. And it said, "I am with you. Now go." And as soon as it said "now go," I came out of this stupor. And for whatever reason, I just started fucking bawling, right? Just crying and crying, 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 crying. And I was thinking about my life. I was thinking of the many, many times I should have died. I didn't. I was thinking about the life that I've been blessed to live. And my mom's told me from a young age, you have a hotline with God. And I've lived a blessed life through even whatever struggles I may have endured. It's been blessed. I could not be more grateful. And I started saying to God, why do I get this? Why do I don't deserve it? And it said, "You know why." And I said, "No, I don't. And I was just thinking more of these things. I was thinking about all the pain, like even as I was sitting there, as we're sitting here, there's people right now being killed. There's people being trafficked. There's people being tortured. There's people in fucking war zones and refugee camps. All of this, right? All this was entering my head. So I don't know why I did. And I said, I feel so guilty. I feel so grateful. I feel guilty for it, but I also feel so grateful for it. And then I heard the voice say, "That's why." And then I started bawling again. And to me, and I'm again, you don't have to think this way, that's fine. But to me, it was like the guilt I feel around losing my friend in war. And like it's held me with power. Have you ever seen the movie The Green Mile?
Yeah.
So there's that scene, right, where he is the guy who can heal people through his touch. But as a result, the sort of the curse of his ability to heal people through his touch is he feels the pain of the world. And he says, I just want this to end. I'm tired of feeling the glass piercing through me. I'm tired of this pain. And I was thinking about that scene too. And I just felt like I get to be a messenger for these messages gifted through me to these places I play on the edge. And the guilt is the price I pay. I owe the debt for this life. And if that's the price I pay, so be it, for the rewards I gain, for the life I've been blessed to live, and for the places I get to go and the things I get to do. And that's how I earn my life. And again, I'm not saying everybody should think this way, because everybody, like, I'm not saying it's help. Like, a lot of people have told me it's unhealthy, and I don't care. It works for me, and I could not love my life more. But it just left me bawling in tears as I had this conversation with God, that it made sense of a lot of my guilt around my buddy in war. It made sense a lot of the constructs in which I operate from. And I remember journaling, because I was journaling in the dark as well. And I journaled after that you owe a debt for this life, and all debts must be paid. All debts must be paid. That's one of the core reasons why I do what I do. I get to go into these places. I get to earn my life through going into these places. The suffering I inevitably experience, and it's deep in terms of voluntary suffering, as in, again, suffering I get to choose as opposed to suffering forced upon us. It's some of the most intense suffering a human being could experience. And it's how, by going there, I get to unearth the treasures, and that suffering is me earning my life. It's paying off my debts and bringing it back, not just the suffering, but bringing the wisdom back.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. I
Thank
mean,
you, brother.
I'm thinking of like traveling through Antarctica. I'm thinking of like the things that you're talking about, and my experience with cold, right? A cold plunge or a shower, or playing in the snow with my kids and like having like snow in my boot. I'm like, oh, this is terrible. But I can't imagine, going to those extremes. But I understand it in the microcosm of that cold, right? It sounds stupid, but when you're freezing cold, but
Not at all.
when your kids want to play in the snow, but you're freezing, right? Or the sensory deprivation tank being a microcosm of 7 days, but like I remember when I was at that 0 point, and I was explaining this to someone actually fairly recently, a family member of mine, and we're talking about meditating. He's like, yeah, but what about like your family? I'm like, there is no family. He's like, what about your wife and your kids? I'm like, there is no wife and kids. It's like, what about like, I'm like, there is no you. You don't exist in this space. You are floating through the cosmos. You are ebbing and flowing between void and everything. And the second I recognized I was in that space, I snapped right out of it. And I recognized that there was the letting go that I wasn't allowing to happen. And there was a fear behind that. There's a fear behind allowing myself to fall into that space. So when you said earlier, I fear death, if I don't want to die, but I don't fear it, because there's that old Ram Dass quote. I believe it's like, fear is like they're taking off a tight shoe. And if that experience I had in the tank is what's on the other side of this, we have nothing to fear.
Got you. And I'm not saying everybody, quote unquote, should fear death.
Right.
But like, it works for me. And I think if you develop a healthy, positive relationship to fear, it changes how you approach the fear of anything, whether it be death or anything. I have a very healthy relationship with fear, and I'm fucking terrified of most things I do. I'm terrified, dude. I went on a date yesterday. I was more scared of that than I genuinely had butterflies in my stomach, anxiety, nerves, more than I do doing the insane shit I do. And I do a lot of really fucking hard shit. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, after 5.5 days of no food, I went on a 5-hour hike with 102 degrees with 4,500 feet of elevation gain. It got so bad. I was cramping. I was nauseous. I was dizzy. I was lightheaded. I was on the cusp of passing out. I was throwing up everywhere. And I had trained for 17 hours in a period of 6 days with 0 calories in like 100+ degree temperatures. I was in a horrible way. I do all that shit, no nerves. I can fucking crush that. I go on a fucking date and I'm terrified. So, so point is to say, like, I feel fear all the time. I just don't like, I don't, it doesn't bother me that it's there.
Yeah, it's a different relationship. You know, the old expressions like the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. But the
Mm.
more I lean into this conversation and, you know, see what you're doing, I really think the opposite of love is fear. You know,
So I'm gonna counter that with respect. I don't think fear is the antithesis of love. I think fear is an expression of love. Like we often
there.
hear people will say there's only two ways of being fear and love. I was a time in my life where I wasn't scared of dying. It's because I didn't value my life. I fucking love life today. I love life. I'm so fucking grateful for it. As I've been saying, that's why I'm terrified of dying. Why are we scared? I was scared of that date because it mattered to me. I really liked this person. This was like our second date. That's why I was nervous, right? Why do we scared of why am I scared of losing somebody I love? Like if I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, I'm scared because I love life. I don't want to fucking fall, you know? Like I'm scared of losing people because I love them. People like people, public speaking, for example, one of the biggest fears. And we can find all the reasons. Like there's obviously like evolutionary constructs of fear of rejection. If
Sure.
I look stupid, I lose the tribe. But I was helping somebody, you know, fear of public speaking, one of the biggest fear there is. I was talking to a client, like he was saying he was scared of public speaking. I was like, if you reframe that fear as love, it's because you give a shit about your message, right? Even writing a book on fear, writing a book, Fearvana, I was terrified. I was terrified that people would think it's stupid. People think it's garbage. I get a 1-star review on Amazon. People think I'm stupid. But I was scared because I didn't want to just put some shit out there. If I didn't care, I wouldn't have been scared. My fear was an expression of love, not only for my message, but for the people that I wanted to help through the message. So I think that when you reframe how you view fear, you see it as an expression of love. And that's why I think it'll change how you interact with fear and it'll help you better face it, you know, because we're all going to feel scared in life. If you're doing hard shit, you certainly will, you know, but if you view fear as an expression of love, it'll just help you relate to it better and then deal with it better.
Wow. Yeah. That's a
Hope that
really,
makes sense.
no, it does. And it really gives me a point to reflect on because, yeah, I think that using fear, like, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, it's like, oh, don't feel fear and fearless and all of these things
Yeah.
is a coat of armor to, you know, it's a force field. It's a coat of armor. Oh yeah, don't feel, you know, and again, it goes back to that kind of toxic masculinity, to not feel fear. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's wow, that's good. That gives me something to really sit on and really.
Oh, yeah. And especially parents for kids, we often tell kids, like, don't be scared, don't worry, don't stress, don't be anxious. We're saying don't feel what you feel. And why are
Mm,
you denying the experience of that feeling? Like, instead, it's so much valuable to say, got it, you're scared. Tell me more about that fear. Then be with it, let them experience it, let them acknowledge it. And then they'll start to realize, like, because even kids, especially young men, how many times young men, you know, you can't be scared of shit. I'm not scared of anything. But they're all feeling it. Then they're just denying it. And it shows up in unhealthy ways, right? It shows up, it's subconsciously going to show up anyway. Like Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Right. So, and even in war, we used to say if somebody says they're not scared, they're either lying or they're insane. They're out of their fucking mind. Like it's valuable to have fear. In the arenas I play in, I want to be scared. Fear kills complacency. In war, I was scared. Everybody, like you, it's valuable. So especially when you're working with young kids, don't deny them the presence of that emotion. It's gonna affect them unhealthily if you do. Let them feel it. Let them be with it. Let them embrace it. Let them experience it. Now, got it. Let them reframe it. Then let them use it. You know,
yeah,
experiencing
no.
like just it's because I get scared. Like I said, I get scared of everything. And there was a time where even I didn't want to admit it. Oh, you shouldn't be scared of this. Don't be a bitch. You know, you do crazy things or don't like admit it. Now I openly share that I'm scared of like the most dude. Forget about even going on a date. I was getting more nervous messaging a girl on a dating app once than I was like doing the crazy shit I do. Just messaging a girl on an app.
But
And then
couldn't
here's the
you?
thing, like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll finish what I'm saying. Then you can say it's like one could say I'm embarrassed to admit that, but I don't care that I feel it. Did I still message? Of course. Did I still go on the date? Of course. The point is not that I feel the fear. The point is what you do with it once you show up. So I don't care that it's there, and I'll admit it when it's there all the time. I don't. It doesn't bother me.
what I was going to say was, and then you could just obviously repurpose that fear or that feeling, like I was saying earlier, when you're saying, oh, I feel anxious, you can alchemize that and just say, I'm excited, you know, because you do care, right? Or you
Yeah,
feel fear about
exactly.
this
It
date
matters
because you actually, yeah, yeah, no,
because it matters.
that's,
I don't feel fear going to, if I was going out to meet the same person in the context of a business meeting, I would have no nerves, no fear. I'm very comfortable meeting people. I'm comfortable in social settings. No fear. You put the date lens on it, suddenly fear shows up because now there's consequences. It matters to me. I want like this person. I want to be in a relationship, right? So now it's because I love what the opportunity this thing could present, you know? So suddenly I feel fear. Got it. Awesome. It's beautiful.
that's great. Yeah, no, that gives me something to sit on, man. Because, you know, again, I think that the relationship, and again, saying that the opposite of love isn't, you know, isn't hate, it's fear. I think the root of it, right? That's the potential duality. But again, dancing in between those two worlds, you can bring the dance back to say, well, it's, you may not fear this thing, but you actually love it, right? And that's
Yeah.
why you do
Yeah.
fear it, or maybe that's why you don't fear it,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I'm scared to death.
Maybe I need to be more scared of death, or more. Maybe I need to value life more.
I mean, again, it's not to say my way is the only way, but
No,
like,
no, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
it does allow me to experience life at a high intensity that I'm very grateful for
Yeah, and
in
I
any,
think it's, I
any
think
way
it's
we
important
can.
to have these mental chess games with yourself. You know, it's
Totally,
important to go
absolutely.
into these talking points, or these, you know, into these spaces. You know, again, the trail running, jujitsu, chess that I'm trying to get myself more and more into, sensory deprivation. I seek these things that in theory are endless, right? In theory, like perfect jujitsu rolls
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
just, there aren't 75 taps, you know, it's a dance. It just keeps on going, you know.
yeah,
Running to that
yeah,
extent, same thing. Like in theory, I mean, you know better than probably most, you can keep on running, you know. It's just
yeah,
a matter of where your
yeah,
mind is going to stop you.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Man,
Man,
amazing stuff. What
thank you.
is what is what what would you like, again, you've had all these experiences on the outside of the human experience, if you will. What is the one thing that you would advise people to go and do that they could do in their everyday life, that they can go and experience the microcosm of what you experience?
I would say I'm going to cheat and say two things. One is stillness, and two is suffering. So go do hard shit, whether it be a cold tub or exercise. Make sure you hate it, at least one moment of it. It should not feel easy. And then the other thing is stillness, because I think in my experience of the human condition and myself, and was working as a life coach, speaking all over the world, like it's one of the greatest fears is that human beings have is stillness. Carl Jung also said people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And you see that. I mean, that could not be more evidenced in the way you just go into any public space and tell me how many people you don't see on their phones, right? Like we do everything to distract ourselves from ourselves. So when you be still, you will start opening doors within yourself that have never been opened before. I highly recommend darkness retreats for everybody. I think it'll be greater. It'll amplify like 20 different seminars and years of therapy into one condensed experience if you go into a darkness retreat. But you don't have to go that far. Lock yourself in a room for half an hour in a dark room. Forget about 10 days. Go for half an hour. I guarantee you it'll open some new doors. Then if it's too easy, go for an hour. Go deeper, go deeper, go deeper. Stillness and suffering. One of my core mantras, when you seek out a suffering of the spirit, you will find salvation of the soul.
Say that one more
When
time.
you seek out suffering of the spirit, you will find salvation of the soul.
Wow. Yeah. That will I couldn't agree more. You learn a lot about yourself in those moments, and you definitely bring those to light, man. I think that that's really, having someone like you in the world showing up the way you do shows, yes, the extremes of where people can go, but also offers an opportunity for you and for others to recognize that opportunity can be transmutated and alchemized and brought back to heal and to serve, you know, and if you're going to go so extreme one way, you're going to swing back the other way, right? But so many people live within those bumpers and don't want to break outside the cultural norms and expectations.
Yeah. Absolutely, brother.
Dude, thank you so much. This was I'm so glad we were able to put this and get this recorded. We've been trying to put this together for a little bit. My schedule, your travel endeavors. Yeah, man, I love that stillness piece. I have a picture up here of Dr. Manhattan from and it says it's a quote. It says all of humanity's problems stem from men's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And that's one of my all-time favorites because
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more, man. You know, the suffering may not be for
I like
everybody,
that one.
but I think you'll learn a lot in it.
Absolutely.
But the stillness, man, that's an on-ramp to the highway of your soul for sure.
Beautifully put, brother. Couldn't agree more.
Dude, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Where can people connect with you? Where can people grab the book, which I highly recommend? I just picked it up and I've been kind of flipping around. You quote, I mean, obviously Carl Jung, you bring into the victory. Frankly, you have some amazing quotes. I'm a quote lunatic, so I'm excited to do a deep dive. But where can people connect with you? Where can people, you know, get your services or hear you speak?
Yeah, fearvana.com. It's Fearvana. Instagram at Fearvana, and the book is available on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, Audible. All the profits from the book go to charity, so we support many beautiful causes. And so the book is available out there. And right now we also are getting ready for the Antarctic crossing. Great, like at Fearvana, you'll find, or at the Instagram Fearvana, greatsoulcrossing.com. Great, SOUL, soulcrossing.com. We have a crowdfunding campaign for the Antarctic crossing. Any support there would be much appreciated because it's a big task, and to raise the funds to make this happen.
Dude, I'm excited to watch you continue on your journey. I look forward to future conversations with you, and I really appreciate you coming on the show, brother.
Thank you for having me, brother. Really enjoy the conversation.
Pleasure.